morning, everybody. My name's
Right.
Tom. My name's Tom Mackenzie. I'm the chair and founder of MAD. Very nice to welcome you here this morning to our webinar on improving processes and adding ROI to our manufacturing community here in Yorkshire. Great to see everybody. We've got 30 minutes this morning, and I'm going to pass you straight over to Chris Parker, who is going to run us through this webinar this morning, just to make sure that we can get as much as possible from Chris, who will share his knowledge for about 20 minutes, followed by a Q&A session at the end. There is a Q&A button at the top of Teams, so if you had any questions as we run through this, please feel free to put them in there, and I'm sure Chris will be very happy to answer those at the end of the webinar. But over to you, Chris. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. What I want to do this morning, 20 minutes isn't a long time to start discussing process, to be honest. It's a whole day of a job in the world I live in. But what I wanted to do this morning is give people an idea of how breaking down and simplifying business processes can help to improve the productivity, reduce costs, and provide a succession plan, and a number of other benefits, really. There's an element of interaction, so if you want to ask, like Tor says, if you want to ask questions, please feel free to do so. Hopefully Tor can monitor that, because I'll struggle trying to use two screens at the same time. But if you do have questions, feel free to comment. But what I want you to think on slide 4, and I don't know whether there's an ability to allow people to talk at this point, but on slide 4, I'm going to ask a question, and I want to start thinking about it now. And that's, why do processes actually fail? You know, what causes process to fail? So I just start thinking about that between now and then. But as a bit of a thought provoker, I wanted to this is one of my favourite quotes that I use quite a lot, and it's from one of the pioneers of business improvement, W. Edwards Deming. 85% of the reasons for failure are deficiencies in systems and process rather than employees. The role of management is to change the process rather than badgering individuals to do better. You know, he really understood the importance of defining robust processes for businesses to become efficient. And it is a trap that we get into in organisations, that we don't define. We blame people for not following process, but the process isn't right in the first place. So I want you to really think about that as we go through this. I guess the first thing we need to know is, ask ourselves, what is a process? Every business has them. Some have more than others, some are more complex than others, but what exactly are they? In a simple definition, it's a series of actions and decisions that we go through to create a service, a product, or a document. And it could be anything from building a car, selling a house, selling insurance, booking a holiday. They're all processes. And we live by process on a day-to-day basis. Even if we, in our own personal lives, we have process. So an element of this is, why do we have it? That question is there. Why do processes fail? I don't know whether we can turn the mics on at this point if anybody wants to answer the question. Is that possible, Tor? So why think of reasons why processes fail. Anybody?
Is it because sometimes it's in people's heads rather than documented?
An element of that, certainly. That's certainly one of the reasons, and one of the reasons that we're going to actually look at it very shortly.
Is it the processes are overcomplicated and people haven't been trained on how to use them?
Yeah, that's another reason. Anything else? Tell you what, I'll give you some.
Sorry, Dan speak. Maybe processes aren't updated, as businesses grow. So
absolutely, one of the biggest, and that, Dan, is actually one of the biggest causes. People start off with process and then forget over the course. They don't review them. It's basically, they don't go back and review what they do, and the business will have improved and things will have moved on. and those processes become antiquated. So here's a sort of a very quick list. I mean, this is not a non-exhaustive list, but what we're saying there: lack of clear objectives and goals. They're not defined and communicated very well. Inadequate planning, so they're not planned properly. They're not defined properly on paper, and we're going to come back to that in a very short while. Inefficient workflows, they're outdated, like we just said. Lack of stakeholder involvement, so the senior leadership haven't got involved in this and actually created these processes. Insufficient resources. We don't understand how many people it actually takes to do the process. Resistance to change. How many times have we heard we've always done it that way? It's the bane of my life when I go to customers and I see people saying, "Oh, we've always done it that way." But why? Challenge the status quo. Poor communication and lack of training is a key one. It's all right having the process, but if nobody knows what it is, how can they work to it? And that goes back to what Deming said. Make sure the process is communicated and trained correctly. But yeah, inadequate monitoring and evaluation, and that comes down to management and leadership, making sure there's measures in place. As time goes on, you sort of realise that a lot of this, they overlap each other. So these factors all interact and they compound each other quite heavily, leading to even more process failure. So good business process requires planning, it requires communication, continuous review and evaluation, and the willingness to adapt. If we find a better way of doing it, adapt to it. So, but what does the cost of failure actually look like? Well, there's an anecdotal way of looking at this. So, and we call it the 110-100 rule. If we eliminate a problem at the order entry stage, and we generally do it correctly, it's going to cost us £1 to fix. If we have an error during the production and manufacturing stage, remediation of that, it costs us £10. All right, it's tenfold, but it costs us £10. We can fix it before it becomes a real problem. If that problem gets out to the customer and we have to think about replacement or repair, it goes tenfold. And that's not included if it happens twice and our customer is a big customer, a repeat customer, the potential problems that leads to, the dissatisfaction, loss of a customer, it could cost potentially thousands. Get a bad Google review in there and you're in all sorts of problems. So it's important to think about how we eliminate those problems at the start. And one of the ways is to get the process right first. So it's somewhere where I always work to start with this at the very beginning. So this morning is all about the process itself. How do we eliminate some of those reasons for process failure? So the lack of objectives, communication, collaboration, training. And what I want to do is show people how to break this down and define and document process and actually put it to good use in the workplace. Businesses normally focus around one core business process, which is the money maker. So, and that is what I call a level one process. It's the main part. It's the money maker. It's the one that brings the revenue into the business. That might be split a couple of different ways. You might have, if there's multiple products, but there's a core process there. It's generally made up of second level processes that could be, and just an example, it could be sales, goods in, manufacturing, packing and dispatch. That is your core process broken down into its component parts. Sat around that, you've then got what we call support process. So finance, HR, training, reporting, marketing, IT, account management. There's others, but those are just examples. Even those break down slightly into, so HR could break down into disciplinary process. It could break down into recruitment process, retention processes. Finance could break down into financial planning, budgeting, billing, things like that, accounts. So all these processes break down further. If we take the manufacturing process in its entirety, so process level 2, that then breaks down again into the level 3. Press the button again. Into level 3 processes. So if we take the building of a computer, for instance, your level 3 processes then break down into building a screen, procedure for installing a hard drive, installing a motherboard, adding graphics cards, etc. All these are separate processes, which then break down again because it doesn't stop. It's now going to go down into the finer details, and we go down into the operating or OTGIs, on the ground instructions, work instructions, operating, whatever you want to call it. There's different terminologies for it, but you're breaking all this process right down, and it's common for a lot of businesses to stop here. They don't get into the detail of this. So they've got a process. If they are ISO 9001, they were probably happy with that because of the process there. But what we want to do is break it down into its finer details so that people understand it more. And playing devil's advocate, which I often do, I would always ask, what happens if someone leaves the business? If you've got someone on this stage here that has all the knowledge in their head, what happens when they leave the business or they retire? You've then got to try and train them. If you haven't got the information to train them, how do you do it effectively? And this is where businesses become dilute. The knowledge in the business becomes dilute, especially around IT processes as well. If there's technical terms involved, and in reality, it's probably going to look something like that. You'll have work instructions. Some of these processes might be smaller, so you write them on a slightly different detail. But in reality, that is probably more what it would look like as a breakdown. Apologies if I am going through this very quick. There's quite a few slides. I'm just trying to make sure I don't. So, how do we document the audit? Now, this is a recommendation. This is the way I do them, and this is the way I recommend them doing. Put four primary headings in there. So, primary responsibility. Who is responsible? Who is responsible for this process? The objective. What does it actually do? What is this activity? What's the procedure? Why is this procedure important? Just a quick 2 sentences, like an overview of it. What are the outcomes? Well, what does good look like? At the end of this, what is going to come out? What is the output from this process? List the outcomes that are going to be accomplished by accomplishing this process. If there's a specific result, include it. And then instructions, a step-by-step guide. It should be written to the level of the reader, the end operator. Don't use jargon, don't use long words. It's the target audience. These people need to understand it. So include hints and tips on, screenshots, illustrations, photographs, people learn in different ways. So by including all that sort of thing, they're more likely to understand it. If you want to put analogies in there or anything works, but right to the level of the person that's actually reading it. Some optional headings that I sometimes recommend, especially in a manufacturing environment where you might have prerequisites, any skills, knowledge, training that's required to use certain machinery. Link it to safety, from a health and safety point of view, and I know Tony will be happy about that. Include the safe working practice in there. If it's linked to a risk assessment, if that particular machine is linked to a risk assessment, include it. Put it in there as well. And what equipment's needed, what supplies, if there's a certain number of supplies that's needed for that particular stage, you include that in there. Time expectations. This is where we start getting into this idea of putting measurement against the process. How long does it take to do? And then any advice, best practice. Always good to share best practice. If you've got one person that can do the job quicker than somebody else, it's always good to throw that advice in there. This is how I do it. But we need to try and standardize that as best we can. And this is all about standardizing best practice. And eventually it creates what we call our business operations Bible. We've got a Bible. And again, this isn't just the manufacturing process. This is everything within the business, the accounts process, the sales process, everything put into a business operations Bible, how you actually run your business. What are you're going to put it all in one place as a fully documented repository of process and operating instructions. It's going to be used for training and future reference as a future reference document, so people can go back to it. It's going to be easily accessible for people to go back, have a look at it, and actually, yeah, I remember how to do that. And hold it electronically. It can be as simple as holding it in SharePoint, OneDrive, or in a shared folder on a server. Very, very easy to put together. It takes a little bit of time, but once you put it together and people have got access to it, very simple to keep on top of. And that's how it possibly might look this is just a bit of an example, but you've got your top level business process here, breaking down into your different levels, and then it breaks down further like you would in a file structure on your server. And just as an example, this is one that I've done recently. I've been working with a construction company. That was their high level business process. They were having particular problems with, was the design manager having particular problems with his design and drawing and fit out stages. And when we put it into a process map and tried to put a timeline against it, it looked like bad plumbing. So what we tried to do, simplify it a little bit. So we broke it down into 4 stages. We broke it down to a design phase, a preparation phase, pick and pack, and fit out, which looked like that. So you can see design and drawing was the design and collate, fit out was pick and pack. We then broke it down further. So we broke it out, and these broke out into two smaller processes, one leading into the other. And in the end, we had 4 separate processes. The ones in red were the ones where we broke it down into on the work instructions as well. I haven't included that in this. 4 very quick, very simple processes, but they will break down again into their component parts on the report and damages, for instance, in that one. That's it. I hope that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of processes. There's a lot more to it, but this would be the first stage around getting processes working properly. Is there any questions around that?
So you mentioned about processes being written down and documented, and you've just shown us that.
Yeah.
Do you think that's as good or better than video, or do you think that we should have a bit of both, depending on how people learn and digest information?
Again, it's there's a learning thing behind it. If you go into the learning development elements of it, people learn in different ways, and people either learn because they learn by doing the job, or learn by reading, or learn by watching. It varies. It's trying to put a mix. I'm from the learning development side of what I do. I would say mix it up, but it is always good. Always ideal to have the process written down in the first place. At least have an overview of what that process is. There's different by putting it into a training document and even putting a video behind it. You can video somebody actually doing the process. It's very easy to do.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Take a camera.
So when someone's actually doing it, video them at the time that they're doing it to show it off at its best.
You get some step. Yeah. So you can put a video in there, but I would recommend it is written down. We're trying to eliminate grey area, and people interpret process differently, and one person A is going to do it different from person B if it isn't standardised and everybody's trained.
Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, have you got some success stories you can tell us all about where you've introduced this to various companies and how much money it saves them or anything?
So there's some questions from people.
I think You freeze there,
Sorry, I
Chris.
missed that. Yeah,
Tony, could you just repeat your question? Because I think Chris froze at that point.
Hello, if you can hear me, can you tell me of some success stories that you've where you've implemented your systems and how it saved the clients money?
Let me just stop sharing a second and let me.
Oh, not sure if we've lost Chris there.
I mean, to give you an idea. No, I think my internet's playing havoc. I'm just trying to stop my sharing a screen because it's.
Did you get the question, Chris?
Yeah, so I mean, with that particular client there that we're talking, that we did the process work for. I mean that client was doubling up year-on-year growth. They were really struggling with a warehouse that was unfit. Well, it was too small for purpose, but they were doubling up on the volumes. So what we did with their part of their fit out, or part of that project, was also to look at what they were doing on specifically the pick and pack side. They had a distinct lack of space in a 32 metre by 32 metre warehouse that they were really struggling with, and we created them double the amount of storage space by rearranging the racking, adding a little bit of racking in there, moving some workflows around, training the team in there on the new workflows, and we got an increase of 500% on their operating capacity. So
wow.
Instead of just doing sort of the fit out for 2 homes, they could do 10 at a time. So it really did a massive impact on their business. They were really struggling to cope with the volumes that were coming through in the sort of back end and early part of this year.
Impressive.
So that was just one. So
yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, they doubled up to like a 300 million turnover business very in a year. So it was a huge step for them.
Brilliant.
Anybody
else got any questions? I do have a question that someone sent in, Chris, who unfortunately can't be here this morning,
Okay.
and I'm not quite sure whether they're trying to absorb themselves of the responsibility of doing it, but they say, who should write the processes?
If you were to ask me, I would say, I would say that the function owner should write the process up. So whoever is in charge of that function should be responsible for that process. However, it is also, I think it's highly recommended that the operators get involved in it. Who runs the process? The person. It's the operator. So when you work in a lean environment, you're talking about lean teams, then working together to define the process for you. So it might be that you get somebody who's really good at writing process. Some people are natural at it, some people aren't. But from a step-by-step write it out, an operator could do that. It's just a case of putting it into some sort of format. But the function owner is the person I would say is responsible for that, and should be also the one that reviews it.
Right. So how often should they be reviewed then?
If you were to look in, ISO 9001 would say every 12 months.
Right. Oh, I think Chris has perhaps frozen there, but
go back and get that operating team to look at it again. That's where you get your continuous improvement. By reviewing and going back and saying, how do we do it better? How do we do it quicker? How do we become more efficient? So I would say review it regularly if you feel it, if it needs it, if it's something that can be improved.
So am I right in thinking that it can be a massive piece of work to do at the beginning to get everything out of everyone's heads and get it all documented, but easier to review as you progress?
Yeah, it's short-term pain, long-term gain, the way I look at it. If you can start with core processes, start with the ones that make the money, and start with the ones that fail the most, and then build it from there. And I think that repository will build and build and build. And a business I worked with a couple of years back, it was my last employed role. It took me 12 months. That a lot of it I was doing myself. I was putting it all together as the head of operations. So it was, I was using my team to there as well. So it was putting all that together. It was quite laborious, but in some cases it doesn't take that long. You know, if each person does their own bit, you can usually put it together pretty quickly.
So is it very much people need to do it, or is there a particular software that would help that you might recommend for easing that process?
In the early stages, like I said, using Microsoft is as easy as anything. Just to use Microsoft Word to write it all down. You can drop pictures and things into there. I've got a template if people want it. But there are softwares. There's one called Sweet Process, one called Where We Do that I've used both of them, and they're both pretty good. But there's lots of process softwares out there. And those particular two are actually helping to put it through step by step and actually create it for you. With the actual process diagrams, and those were just put together on I think I use PowerPoint for that. Simple as that. PowerPoint. You can use forgotten what the other ones. I sometimes use one called Lucid Chart, which is another one that's really good for putting process diagrams together. Visio's another one. A good one for putting process diagrams. But yeah, the actual write-up of a work instruction, Word, simple as that, Word, and just make sure they're all documented together.
So I guess that's kind of a barrier being removed if people are thinking, oh, I can't create a document like what you've created there because I've no idea. If they can do it and just brain dump all that information into Word as a start.
Yeah, tidy it up afterwards. The whole idea is get it down on paper first. Get it out of people's heads on paper, and the further that goes up the levels, the harder it becomes, because managers have got a lot more in their head than what operators have. Operators are probably just sticking to one certain area, or you might get one guy that knows everything. But trying to get it all on paper, this is succession planning. This is, that person leaves the business, what happens next? And that's the key part to this, putting it down on paper so you know how your business runs and you can train people on how to do it. The business becomes autonomous then.
Brilliant.
Managers can manage. They don't need to get involved in the day-to-day running. They just overlook it all. It's just about using a bit of collaboration there and getting everybody working the same way.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much. We are almost at 9:30. Did anybody have any other questions just before we wrap up? Feel free to pick Chris's brain. If you think of any questions, the QR code there, feel free to scan that. That will take you to an email, so email those over. And I believe, Chris, that you're very happy for anybody who has got any questions to get in touch with you.
Yeah, no problem.
And obviously you've done a fabulous presentation there that was very generic about processes. So if anybody wanted to have a meeting with you to discuss their specific processes, questions in a bit more detail, just to get in touch.
Absolutely. Yeah, no problem.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Yeah, use that QR code to email through. We'll put you in touch with Chris and arrange that. Our next webinar is, I believe Tony's going to be running that. Tony, if you just want to give us a quick heads up on what that's going to be.
Hi there. Yeah, it's all going to be about workplace traffic management, a very important part of health and safety. about 31 people a year get killed with vehicles reversing. So what we need to do is look at that. We'll be giving you a free risk assessment and going through how to make sure that your employees are safe while vehicles are moving.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. There will be more details on that on the Mad Yorkshire LinkedIn page, so feel free to follow that. Thank you everybody for your input. Particular thanks to Chris for sharing your knowledge there. Really appreciate it. Very interesting, very useful. Thank you everybody. Have a great day. See you later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.